Thank you for joining us on Drawn to Conspiracy and Murder. In a quiet neighborhood in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, a name would forever be linked to unspeakable horrors. Jeffrey Dahmer, a man who lived a double life, hiding his monstrous nature behind a facade of normalcy. What led him to commit one of the most chilling series of crimes in American history? Dahmer's crimes were not just brutal, they were deeply depraved, marked by acts of unimaginable cruelty and a twisted obsession with power and control over his victims. But to understand his descent into madness, we need to take a step back and look at his life, his motives, and the shocking details of his crimes. Born on May 21, 1960, in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, Jeffrey Dahmer seemed, at first glance, like a shy, quiet boy. Even though he kept mostly to himself, he is seen as a polite, intelligent boy. As he grew into adolescence, he was known as a class clown, but also seen as a social outcast. The signs of his eventual descent into violence weren't immediately apparent, however, troubling behaviors began to emerge. As a teenager, he started to experiment with alcohol and engage in disturbing acts, such as dissecting animals, a behavior that is often seen as a red flag in criminal psychology. He would collect animal carcasses and remove their bones, bleach them and use them in macabre displays, skulls on sticks and rib cages splayed open like a twisted shrine to decay. By the time he was in his teens, Dahmer had developed a fascination with death, something that would escalate into a nightmare of unimaginable proportions. His first murder took place in 1978, at the age of 18, when he lured a young man, Stephen Hicks, into his home. Dahmer bludgeoned him with a dumbbell, strangled him, and then dismembered his body. But this would only be the beginning of his grisly killing spree. Between 1978 and 1991, Jeffrey Dahmer lured his victims, often young men and boys, to his apartment with promises of money, alcohol, or even simply companionship. Once there, he would drug, assault, and murder them. But the horror didn't end with death. Dahmer's crimes grew increasingly grotesque as he engaged in acts of necrophilia, dismemberment, and even cannibalism. There was also a growing fantasy of complete control. Dahmer would sometimes drill holes into his victims' skulls while they were still alive and pour acid into their exposed brains in a misguided attempt to create a sex zombie of sorts. This obviously did not work as he was hoping and often led to the brutal death of his victim. After killing his victims, Dahmer would often dismember their bodies, keeping parts as trophies. He admitted to taking photographs of his dismembered victims, a chilling reminder of the extent to which he was consumed by his monstrous impulses. And in some cases, he even went so far as to eat parts of his victims' bodies, claiming it made him feel closer to them. Jeffrey was eventually apprehended after 13 years of killing boys and young men. 17 people lost their lives to this monster, and there may have been others. His arrest came after one of his intended victims, Tracy Edwards, managed to escape and flag down police. Edwards led officers back to Dahmer's apartment, where they made the chilling discovery of his gruesome collection. Inside the apartment, investigators found an overwhelming collection of evidence: human remains, photographs, and even tools used to carry out his grisly acts. His apartment became a house of horrors, with parts of bodies hidden in refrigerators and freezers, mummified remains, entire skeletons, and several skulls. During his arrest, while being held down in handcuffs, it is reported that Dahmer stated, "For what I did, I should be dead." His trial was a media circus, and the newspapers were emblazoned with headlines like "Little Body Shop of Horrors" and "The Cannibal, the face of a madman that killed 17." Eventually, Dahmer would become known as the Milwaukee Cannibal and the Milwaukee Monster. During his trial, he admitted to the murders, though he claimed he didn't want to kill, but couldn't stop himself. He was diagnosed with severe psychological issues, including borderline personality disorder and psychotic tendencies. However, He was found to be completely cognizant and criminally responsible for his actions. Jeffrey also acknowledged his full accountability for the killings. He was convicted of 15 of the 16 homicides he had committed in Wisconsin and was sentenced to 15 terms of life imprisonment on February 17, 1992. Dahmer was later sentenced to a 16th term of life imprisonment for his first homicide of Stephen Hicks, committed in Ohio in 1978. On November 28, 1994, 2 years into his incarceration, Dahmer was attacked by a fellow inmate named Christopher Scarver, who was serving his own murder sentence. Scarver beat Dahmer to death using a metal bar from a piece of gym equipment. According to Scarver, Dahmer had been taunting other inmates and making jokes about his crimes, which caused a great deal of animosity toward him. Scarver later claimed that Dahmer's behavior in prison, including making disturbing jokes about his killings and cannibalism, made him a target. But Dahmer's story is more than just the tale of a killer. It's about the lives he destroyed. The victims, whose names and faces are often forgotten in the wake of Dahmer's infamy, were young men with families, friends, and futures. Each life taken was a tragedy that echoed through the lives of those who loved them. How did Dahmer become one of the most disturbing and horrible serial killers in American history? What led him to become the monster that he was? Nature or nurture? A combination of both, perhaps. I urge you to look into things for yourself and, as always, do your own research and decide for yourself. Thank you for joining us on Drawn to Conspiracy and Murder.